As humanity prepared to enter the 23rd millennium, it took pride in the interstellar civilization it had forged. The first steps taken into a wider universe at Luna and Mars had become an exodus to the stars. Hostile worlds had been tamed and made habitable through skill and sheer persistence. Unimaginable distances had been crossed by transcending the very bounds of reality. The invention of the standard template construct allowed even backwater settlements to enjoy the full fruits of mankind's golden age. Having harnessed the Immaterium for faster-than-light travel and communication, a vibrant human society now stretched from one side of the galaxy to the other. But while mankind's technology allowed it to overcome almost any environmental challenge, it offered little help for the trial to come. For the very nature of humanity itself was about to change. It was at this time that the first natural human psychics were born, an event that would forever reshape mankind's destiny. These individuals, known as psykers, appeared simultaneously at the start of the 23rd millennium on worlds all across human space. While those who possessed the navigator gene had been capable of perceiving the warp in a limited way, these new psykers were of a very different breed. They possessed no outward signs of their difference, like a navigator's warp-sensing third eye, nor were they united by any detectable common lineage or family ties. The difference was much more profound. The new psykers did not simply perceive the warp's currents like navigators. They channeled its raw power to produce seemingly magical results by manipulating the fabric of reality. They could read and control minds, and move objects as large as small buildings with only a thought. Some could release blasts of warp energy that could disintegrate steel or cause the earth to shake. At first, many saw this as an almost miraculous event, the first step in the next stage of human evolution. They believed that humanity was on the cusp of becoming like the Eldari, able to blend the mystical powers of the warp with the predictable logic of physical law. Some hoped for an unprecedented technological renaissance that would dwarf all that mankind had already achieved. They could not have been more wrong. While the new psykers could channel the energy of the warp like the Eldari, they had none of that species' inherent ability to control such power. The warp is a dimension of pure psychic energy, whose true nature is unknowable, irrational, and incomprehensible to a being of real space. Most who sought to perceive it directly were rendered insane. It was to counter this difficulty that the navigator gene had been carefully selected for in the human population. But unleashing the energies of the warp into real space represented similar dangers for the new psykers. Only those gifted with great strength of mind and willpower were able to use their abilities without the risk of madness. Yet, even if a psyker avoided mental instability, the use of their powers always attracted the attention of the entities who called the Immaterium home. Humanity had been aware of the existence of these beings since the first days of warp travel. Their assaults had been responsible for the loss of many early warp-capable starships. This danger led to the development of the Geller field, which projected a bubble of real space into the warp around the vessel to keep such predators at bay. Psykers, whose minds served as a bridge between the warp and real space, had no such protection. Those who came into contact with warp entities and lacked the willpower to resist their mental intrusions could be possessed by them. Such psykers became conduits for these creatures, who hijacked their abilities to reshape reality to their inhuman desires. The new psykers thus represented both an opportunity and a terrible new danger to human civilization. This was reflected in the different reports about their emergence that soon spread across human space. Those psykers who possessed strong wills were capable of creating new wonders that surpassed the hopes of those who welcomed them. But other worlds reported tales of insane psykers run amok. They used their powers without rhyme or reason to unleash destruction and merciless bloodshed. For the first time, mankind found no solution to a problem. No STC database contained a technology that could predict who might be a psyker. No test could detect which psykers had the mental strength to control their abilities. And then, just as the interstellar community began to wrestle with the crisis, they were confronted by a new threat. The warp was becoming impossible to navigate. The Immaterium, the artery of travel and commerce upon which the whole existence of interstellar civilization depended, was becoming unstable. Navigators reported that many of the once placid currents of psychic energy within the warp had become ferocious tempests called warp storms. When a starship was caught in one of these squalls, even its Geller field was not enough to prevent it from being thrown wildly off course or destroyed outright. The result was devastating. Just when human society most needed to share knowledge and resources to deal with the psyker crisis, it found its worlds increasingly cut off from one another. As the population of psykers continued to grow across human space, the numbers of the possessed and insane increased beyond the ability of most societies to contain them. Cut off from each other by their inability to navigate the warp, many worlds were forced to fend for themselves against the psyker threat. Billions died in agony as possessed psykers reshaped reality to please the nightmare beings who wore their flesh. Where the new psykers had once been greeted with hope, now they were a plague. Since there was no way to identify a psyker before their powers manifested, paranoia was rampant on many worlds, resulting in literal witch hunts. Other planets sought to cull their psyker populations outright, seeing mercy as tantamount to suicide. It was then that the alien races who had long coveted human space seized this chance to raid unprotected planets and enslave their populations. Hundreds of star systems were ransacked, their people slaughtered or enslaved. With no hope of assistance from other worlds, too often these societies were simply sitting ducks. Worse was to follow. Fragmented reports began to circulate that the thinking machines that had long labored for and defended humanity had suddenly turned on their masters. Sentient robots began to act almost like possessed psykers, hunting down their creators without reason or remorse. Overwhelmed by aliens, psykers, and robots gone mad, even as interstellar travel became impossible, humanity's galactic civilization collapsed. The interstellar web of trade and knowledge mankind had created was ripped apart. Famine, disease, and violence spread across world after world. As the warp storms grew worse, ending faster than light travel outright, human civilization fell into darkness at the dawn of the 25th millennium. Though historians call this period the Age of Strife, those who lived through it gave it another name. They called it Old Night, and no place was spared its ravages. This included Terra, the birthplace of humanity that was once called Earth. After psykers emerged on Terra, it was not long before the human homeworld suffered the same fate as most of its colonies. The attacks of possessed psykers destroyed much of the planet's infrastructure and population. The loss of access to the warp and its interstellar commerce eliminated what remained of the planet's advanced economy. Panic and scarce resources soon unleashed generations of brutal warfare among those who remained. Every weapon available was used, including the once forbidden nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons of mass destruction. In only a few decades, even Terra's environment was destroyed by this treatment. Its great oceans began to dry up, and its land masses became inhospitable deserts. What had been called Earth was soon little more than a blasted wasteland made up of scattered outposts and small nation-states. Each was ruled by an endless supply of murderous tyrants. These included cybernetically enhanced warriors and possessed psykers who claimed their madness was divine. It was not long before atrocity became the norm, committed by legendary beings with names like the Unspeakable King and the Seven Neverborn. What remained of humanity in the wake of this apocalypse was barely worthy of that name. The survivors of Terra were ravaged by genetic mutations and often crippled by rampant disease. They eked out a miserable existence by preying upon one another to ensure their daily bread. Feral nomads roamed the wastelands and the ruins of better days in search of advanced technology. They had no understanding of how such devices worked, but almost always found something that could be used to kill in new ways. It was for this reason that they are now often called techno-barbarians. But if the bodies of the people of Terra had been ravaged by Old Night, their souls had fared no better. Reason and sanity had been among the first casualties of the fall. Knowledge, truth, and decency held little hold over a world defined by the constant hunt for survival. Ignorance and paranoia had become the real rulers of Terra in the Age of Strife. The population's superstitions were regularly exploited by insane psyker messiahs and self-proclaimed prophets. Such leaders used religion for their own gain, or to motivate their flocks to make war upon the unbelievers. For over 5,000 years, this was the only existence the people of Terra knew. Once the masters of the galaxy, life was now only a slow spiral down towards extinction. Yet the children of old Earth had once had the courage and determination to claim an empire among the stars. Such qualities were still found among a small group of men and women known as the Sigillites. The organization had been formed by those who recognized early on the potential dangers represented by humanity's first true psykers. They had taken up residence in a great complex built beneath the towering Himalayan mountains. There they sought to collect humanity's most dangerous weapons and knowledge. They intended to keep it out of the hands of those they feared would destroy the world. They also sought to preserve the greatest treasures of mankind. This was the art, sculpture, and literature that had once given human life meaning and purpose beyond simple survival. Early in Old Night, the Sigillites had thought that the isolation caused by the instability of the warp and the terrible violence consuming terror couldn't last. But they were wrong, and as the centuries passed, the Earth's miseries only deepened. For 5,000 years, the Sigillites waited, but their people could not help themselves, and no rescue from the stars ever came. Despite their knowledge, no Sigillite could truly comprehend the nature of the Immaterium and what lived within it, or how this would shape the future of mankind. Without this understanding, no solution to the psyker problem, no true salvation, was possible. So it was that the Sigillites' numbers slowly dwindled, until by the start of the 30th millennium, only one remained. His name was Malcador, and he was one of the most powerful psykers ever born, a man of great learning with the bearing of a priest. Yet for all his knowledge, all his skill, all the treasures at his command, Malcador couldn't clear the turbulence in the warp. He couldn't slay every bloodthirsty tyrant and lunatic psyker who afflicted terror. He couldn't unravel the true mysteries of the warp, or determine what path his people should take to master it. He could only hope that humanity would face its demons and pull itself once more out of the darkness as it had so many times before. So Malcador did the only thing he could, and one day he set out to wander the wastelands in search of salvation. To his eternal surprise, he found it. Not in the form of an army of rescuers from the heavens, or even a group of survivors who had pulled themselves up out of the ruins. Salvation came instead in the person of a lone man, one whose eyes shone with determination and unparalleled knowledge. He possessed a strength of will that the last Sigillite had never seen, and the wisdom to finally answer all his many questions. This man had no name, only a title. For Malcador had found the Emperor, the savior of mankind.